culture and history is from the water.
It all stems from the connection to place, that belonging, where you came from.
We weren't always friends. I'm not going to ignore that there were turbulent times. That's the history.
Our culture went underground for a lot of years, almost lost it.
The Tlingit people were convinced that the Park Service was not their friend.
I never ever thought that I would ever see the day in my lifetime that we could return to the homeland.
Long before Glacier Bay was a national park, or even a bay, it was home to 4 Tlingit clans who depended on a close relationship with the land and water for their survival.
Our people were settled here since time immemorial.
And this was a forest, and this was not a bay. It was in the middle of a glacial valley, and there was a huge glacier up there, which they called Sitlin, Big Glacier.
Our people lived here because it was a very, very productive area. There was a large stream here, a large river. In our language, we call it Heen Tlain, big river.
It was very much for us a Garden of Eden. During this time of the year, you would go over to this area and you would collect fish from here. Then you'd come over here for berries.
It had all of the food we needed.
The fish, the deer, the seal, the plants, the berries, everything, the eggs.
It seemed glorious.
Nothing probably in the world, but certainly nothing in the world of Glacier Bay should be thought of as a still shot. It's a motion picture. Everything is in motion. That is probably the main thing that attracted me as a scientist. You walk down the beach and there's something wrong with the picture. There shouldn't be stumps in the beach. The story of Glacier Bay is the story of that glacier activating itself and coming down and killing these trees.
The glacier began to destabilize and began to move forward in the early 1750s.
The ice came and drove us out of our homeland.
That glacier came down as fast as a running dog, they say.
All of the songs that we sing, even to this day, speak of the devastation when they were having to leave their homeland.
And during that same time period, the Raven people out in Tlingit Bay, they were chased out by a tsunami.
People were washed out into the Gulf of Alaska with all their houses.
My aunt would talk to us about people who were drowned there.
Our people went through a lot of grief.
You have this time of hardship, having to relocate to find other food sources. There was little fresh water available. It was a time of near starvation.
And we finally found Huna, which is protected from the north wind in Tlingit. Lots of salmon rivers here, and it became a good home.
The people who live in Hoonah lived in a place that they always knew they would leave, waiting for the ice to retreat.
Then the glaciers receded. We started going back in there and harvesting our foods that we had.
That was our homeland. As soon as that ice started to recede, our people started going back.
Established a new village in Bartlett Cove area. So that's where you have our new houses and fish drying racks.
Even though it wasn't their main winter village, they started moving right back into Glacier Bay. Then along the way, we arrived, basically. We outsiders, first the Russians, then the Americans. This was Glacier Bay after it was, quote, discovered by John Muir.
And he actually had Hoonah sealers take him into Glacier Bay.
He went back and said, hey, this is a special place, we need to protect it.
Other scientists came and saw the importance of the place in terms of understanding glacial and landscape successional processes.
You can't see any better laboratory for environmental change than Glacier Bay.
At the same time, there was this park movement. Areas were being set aside for all people for the future. In 1925, Glacier Bay was established as a national monument.
We asked the elders, tell us about what happened when it became a national monument. They were told they get to do their hunting and their fishing there and do their seasonal gathering of food there, that they can carry on traditional activities in the monument.
Glacier Bay National Monument was created without regard to their history or ownership, and so that was the first phase of alienation.
Over the years, with contact with Western civilization, there was acculturation programs going on. The churches, the schools.
When the missionaries came, they said, burn your totem poles, they're pagan gods.
We weren't allowed to speak our language. Got punished for speaking our language. Our culture went underground for a lot of years.
Also, the 1944 fire burnt Hoonah down, and we lost 80–90% of the town.
A lot of the houses had the tribal clan symbols on the outside.
Those people have been beat up pretty bad.
When the National Monument was expanded in '39, it encompassed about 2/3 of their traditional territory.
At first, many regulations weren't enforced because there weren't many law enforcement here and they didn't have the headquarters here in Glacier Bay. As time went on, more and more of our way of life was not allowed in Glacier Bay.
The grievances of the Hoonah people have at all times centered around Glacier Bay National Monument. From it were obtained nearly every item in the economy of the Hoonah people. King salmon, sockeyes, cohos, and dog salmon, seals, deer, mountain goats. As to their right to hunt and fish and carry firearms in the park, these privileges are to be exercised on an experimental basis. Our file does not indicate this information was ever transmitted to the people of Hoonah.
This is the land, Alaska, 49th state in that federal union called the United States of America. 1/2 hour by air or a full day by boat from Juneau is Glacier Bay. The crew of the National Park Service boat watch and study the massive workings of the Ice Age and lay plans for its ultimate development as a tourist attraction.
That, to me, is one of the most magnificent parks in the system. But the difficulty is that there have been no accommodations for tourists.
I've always seen national parks as this holy grail, one of the great inventions of the United States.
Park staff were excited by the mission of the National Park Service, in many cases very unaware of other cultures and their traditions. These were folks who had their own great sense of ownership for the park.
In 1980, Glacier Bay National Monument was expanded again and became a national park and preserve. Most of the 3 million acres were designated as wilderness, the highest level of protection for public lands.
It's kind of an example of the two cultures that don't understand each other. To our modern white culture, we do this great thing by setting a place aside as a national park and assume everything's good. Oh, it's preserved for the future. Look, everybody can come here and experience it. To the native culture here, they see that as gates being shut. For them, to experience it and appreciate it and honor the land is to live off the land.
The people of Hoonah felt literally locked out of their homeland.
People had hard feelings about the National Park Service.
It wasn't just the Park Service. It's that Western set of governments and rules and laws that disconnected people in real ways from homeland and in psychological ways.
It felt like I was chased out of Glacier Bay, and so was my grandpa.
So there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of resentment.
They could still come here. They could still come to Glacier Bay, sure. But that important connection of using the resources of the land, that had been broken. And that led to years and years of just bad communication, non-communication, difficulties, and I think there were misassumptions on both sides.
The National Park Service is a culture unto itself. The people 50 or 60 years ago were no more malicious than we are today.
None of the powerful people, none of the superintendents, let's say, had a clue how to overcome the Tlingit's pain and disenfranchisement, and at the same time protect park values.
We were trying to find a way to get recognition from the federal government, from the Park Service. And the idea came up that why don't we return to the homeland? We can take all our regalia, we can take our totems, and we can perform ceremonies in the park, the homeland.
We wanted it acknowledged that that is the ancestral homeland of the Hoonah Tlingit people.
It's like, you know, here we are. Hear us, you know. We need to be a part of it, of the place, and we need to be a part of the dialogue.
So the tension was getting pretty high in Hoonah. You know, unbeknownst to the Hoonah people, they could come and pick berries, but the hunting part was a time bomb, point of pressure.
And then in 1992, a halibut fishing boat was up there fishing. One of the deckhands took the liberty of shooting a seal, but he saw that as a Hoonah Tlingit, he had the right to take a seal, and it was intended for a potlatch that fall. Seal was on the deck. Park Service rangers came aboard to check their fishing permit and saw the seal and said, "What's this all about?" They confiscated the seal. There then developed a very contentious issue over the rights and privileges of Hoonah Tlingits in Glacier Bay. The whole thing blew up.
In essence, the tribe was dissatisfied. The federal government was dissatisfied with the relationship.
In the early 1990s, the park hired staff with cultural expertise and a commitment to building tribal relationships. At the same time, the federally recognized tribe reopened its doors, making it possible for a relationship to grow between the two governments.
We often say the federal government never listens to us, but driven by some individual people within the park system. And the park reached across icy straits to us and said, let's try to work together.
Okay, look at this. Hoonah Indian Association, in 1995, the Hoonah Indian Association and the National Park Service entered into a memorandum of understanding which recognized the government-to-government relationship between the tribe and the National Park Service. In that memorandum of understanding, it established a communication link and process.
It was an important document to the tribe that they actually had something in writing that said, yes, you did live in Glacier Bay. We had a totem pole raising to commemorate signing that understanding that we would work on those things that we had in common and that we would move forward.
It was a rough journey at first.
While we were doing all this, Glacier Bay was also embroiled in a very intense political fight over commercial fishing. The process had begun in the early 90s to phase out commercial fishing in the park as an incompatible use, not just in a national park, but also in wilderness. So at the same time that we were opening dialogue with Hoonah, we were also saying, okay, yeah, we want to communicate, we want to participate together in these things, but at the same time, we're going to be phasing out commercial fishing in the park. And many people in Hoonah had fished their whole lives in the park.
Well, a big part of our backyard is Glacier Bay. You know, if you take Glacier Bay out of the harvesting area, that really cuts into a lot.
There were so many hurts over here, so much loss and so much taken away.
Back in those days, it was very controversial. It was not unusual for people to storm out of the meetings.
It's very easy as a government official to go to a meeting and hear tribal folks talk about hurt that happened, and you respond back, well, that wasn't me, or that was that agency. It was, I'm Park Service, that was Forest Service, or that was the military.
After many of those types of meetings, people finally realized that there were certain things that we could agree on to work on, and there were other things that we would never agree on.
The Park Service asked the question, what do we do now? You know, what do we do to improve relationships? What do we do to build a future?
What specifically can the National Park Service and the people of Hoonah do that will help us resolve some of the issues that you've expressed?
And so we decided that in order to move forward, we would put those things aside. We would determine those things that we had in common. We had joined with them on several projects.
One of the projects was the place names map, where we worked with elders to collect traditional place names for Glacier Bay. Berry picking trips. We wanted to show them that there were opportunities to still harvest in the park, and berries is a resource that can be collected very easily.
And we started doing these trips out to various parts of the park to visit old village sites, habitation sites, sacred sites, that we would take elders and youth along. We call them Journey to Homeland.
Probably a whole generation had never really been to Glacier Bay. On several of the trips to our elders, they would shed tears.
These coordinated trips sponsored by the park helped bring a lot of people closer together and help the park understand what Homeland truly did mean.
The smaller projects built to bigger projects.
There was a pivotal meeting in 1997 with park staff and Hoonah elders. So they had a list of requests, and number one was being able to harvest gull eggs in Glacier Bay.
We fashioned an ethnography to collect information from people in Hoonah about their traditional use. So that project was really a prototype. If we're going to ask for traditional knowledge, we need to show people that we're going to honor that knowledge and use it in some way to adapt our management of the park.
You know, after many, many, many years, we can now go and pick seagull eggs in Glacier Bay. That took an act of Congress.
The collection and the consumption of gull eggs is an integral part of the culture of the...
Literally an act of Congress.
The rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
How does this bird hold on to the fish, though? Think about it. When you get it, kill one fish,
and you're open to wait to go for another one when naturally, you know, it's hard to see those goats right now, but it's nice to know.
Most of Glacier Bay is wilderness and experienced by boat. But there is one small developed area near the entrance of the bay.
Probably around 1995, the park was in the process of developing a concept plan for the Bartlett Cove developed area.
The Hoonah Tlingits, they were invited to directly participate.
I remember from the very beginning, what we heard was that visitors to Bartlett Cove were walking on trails that had been walked on by hundreds of indigenous people before, but nobody knew that. And so they asked us to consider some sort of project that would honor the Tlingit tie to Homeland.
We want something that belongs to us, to our culture, that recognizes our presence in Glacier Bay and reaffirms that that is our ancestral homeland.
The idea came up of building a clan house.
And that was the wishes of the elders, is to have a presence, physical presence back in Glacier Bay.
They wanted a place that our traditions, our stories, our way of life would be continued to be shared.
It's our homeland. It's not just a tourist spot.
Park Service had a team that became advocates for the Tlingit presence in the park.
At first, in early meetings, our elders had wanted 4 clan houses, which unfortunately was unrealistic. Many meetings later, they came to a compromise to call it a tribal house, which is unheard of.
This is not a normal project that fit in with the Park Service's construction budget.
And so we started scrambling to try to find some way to fund it. And that went along for years.
Year after year, it would kind of reach up there. It was getting close to the line of funding, but never quite reached it.
It didn't seem like it was going to happen because there were many obstacles.
And that was frustrating for the park. It was frustrating for the tribe because we all knew how important it was.
Over a period of 15 years, a lot of progress was made. And I remember some of our elders saying, we are only taking baby steps, but at least we're moving forward.
And so the park decided that we were going to make it happen with our existing budget, which was no small feat.
Every division and every program within the park maintenance, resource projects, inter-programs, they all had to change the way they were doing business and do without some things in order to try to pay for that project.
A lot of sacrifices were made.
This was the decision of the park, and they stuck by that.
The tribe was involved in the environmental analysis. They were involved in the design. They were involved in reviewing every single architectural rendering that ever came across a Park Service desk. They were involved in all of the teleconferences. Even when they didn't want to be involved, they participated. So it truly was a partnership.
We didn't want to bring in carvers from some other place. We wanted people that were there in the community.
Honestly, I think at the very beginning, I was very concerned that it was a huge, huge undertaking.
Okay.
Left to right.
That's really nice. Yes, indeed, for you as well.
You know, it's been a long succession of people within the tribe and within the park who have worked to make this happen.
Shuyee, which means pulling together, you know, like working together, making things happen.
To return to the homeland for the first time, I felt the power. I got all choked up and tears came to my eyes.
There's no comparison to being in Glacier Bay. I think that our elders knew the value of experiencing and being on the land.
When we dedicated the tribal house, we named the ancestors into it. When we do this, we give it a spirit.
Life had been breathed into the house.
It just vibrated with the heartbeats of all of those people that had felt like they had been shut out and felt like they couldn't go home and didn't get to go home. But I think they were all there with us that day because I could feel their heartbeats in that building on the ancestral homeland.
We do this with our children and our grandchildren's grandchildren. They can be proud and say, I am Tlingit, this is where I belong.
This is a totem pole log. I mean, there's lots of other things you can make out of it too, but what I'm looking at is totem poles.
We're building a pole that's going to tell the Park Service and Tlingit story together. Let's get out those hard facts. Let's get out that real story.
I'm working with community and elders, and I'm going to work with park personnel on elements and issues that they want represented on the pole. And hopefully I can come together with something that tells our history.
Our pole is a story pole. It is essentially the recorded history, not only of the Tlingit, not only of Glacier Bay, but of our long, sometimes painful, sometimes joyous journey together.
You start at the bottom and you go up. And that's the history as you go up to the top.
We can help tell the full story and help one another come to a deeper understanding of the American experience, especially through difficult times.
It stands as a testament to the blood, sweat, and tears that many of us have put in on both sides of the water to heal. It's our story, it's our collaborative story.
The healing pole doesn't represent a completion of healing. It's about a process.
It's not over. I think it's just the first step. For the new generation coming up, the possibilities are incredible.
I think our ancestors would be very proud that we were leaders in the process of creating a healing between the indigenous population and the federal government. This process of talking together, respecting one another, healing together is replicatable.